Welcome to FADA's virtual 2021 annual convention and exhibition. This session is leveraging innovative technology for residents' engagement, web marketing, and PR. Before we begin, we'd like to take a moment to review the logistics of today's webinar. All attendees' cameras and microphones will be muted throughout the event. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. At any time during the session, please use the Q&A link in the toolbar to submit your questions. Do not use the chat function as we will not be monitoring this for audience questions. We are recording this session and we'll make it available on the Whova web app and mobile apps afterwards. And as a reminder, discussions in this session are not for media use. For quotes and more information, please contact FADA directly. And now we'd like to introduce FADA trustee Clementine Elmore, Executive Director of the Housing Authority of Florence, South Carolina, who will present the opening remarks.
Good afternoon. Hi, again, my name is Clementine Elmore, and I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Authority of Florence and a proud Board of Trustee for FADA. I have the pleasure of introducing Ms. Katie Bibby. She is a native of Decatur, Alabama, and a graduate of Auburn University in Auburn, Alabama. She began her career in Washington, D.C. She spent time working on Capitol Hill and in the Office of Management and Budget before returning to Alabama to work in public relations, digital communications, and marketing. Katie then served as the Public Affairs Officer for Alabama Housing Authority, managing their strategic communications, public relations, and marketing before joining Brooks Jeffrey. She is a member of the Brooks Jeffrey sales team and works primarily with Housing Authority clients. Again, I have the pleasure of introducing to you all our speaker this afternoon, Ms. Katie Bibby.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Ms. Elmore, for the kind introduction. I am so excited to visit with you all, and we got a lot to cover today, so let's get started. I'll just share my screen. All righty, so I hope we're all ready today to talk a little bit more about how we can leverage some marketing, public relations, and our websites to better connect with our residents and our community as a whole. So before we get started, I want to introduce Brooks Jeffrey a little bit more. We are a nationwide marketing firm. We do kind of anything and everything, and we specialize in housing authority marketing. Having worked at a housing authority myself, I always say you get the bug, and we are passionate about it here. And we really, work with housers to help them communicate with their residents and their staff and their board more effectively. So to get started, I think it's important we lay the groundwork. I think sometimes we get these two terms confused, and it can kind of get us all turned around when we're thinking about how we're going to reach and communicate with our community and our residents at a whole. So first things first, public relations versus marketing. I like to think of public relations as the power to influence. I don't know if you've heard the term influencers before, but it's kind of where we get it. With public relations, we're trying to cultivate a feeling or emotion or perception of your agency. We want people to have a feeling about the housing authority as a whole. When we think of marketing, we're trying to reach people for a specific goal. We want them to see something specifically, or we want them to interact with you in a specific way. So both of these are important for your housing authority, but depending on what we want, we need to go with one or the other. So with public relations, again, we're trying to typically reach your whole community. That includes your residents, people who live in your community, and, like local officials, your board, people who need to know about you. With marketing, we get a little more specific. I always give the example of a good way to market is trying to reach landlords specifically, because I don't know about y'all, but it was always a little difficult for us to get landlords in. So we may market specifically to get landlords to work with us as a housing authority. Next, with public relations, we're trying to gain some social interaction to increase our overall perception. That's our goal. We want people to think better of the housing authority than maybe they did before. We want them to have a positive perception of us as an agency, even if they never have to utilize our services. With marketing, we have a specific goal in mind, and we're going to invest, probably monetarily, in getting that goal across to our target audience. So using that landlord example, we may be specifically targeting landlords to get them to list their property with our agency, to accept HCV vouchers, something like that. And we may have to specifically invest some funds in reaching those people. And finally, public relations is a continuous process. It doesn't have a starter end date. You aren't just done with public relations one day. We continue it. It's a process that you're always in as an agency. Whereas marketing, you've got a planned time frame. Typically, you want to decide your goal of when you want to contact people and stay within that time frame for marketing. So now that we understand those a little bit better, let's talk about what makes successful public relations. Well, the first thing is strong professional branding. This is how people are going to identify your agency. Next, once we have that branding, we want to integrate it throughout all of your communications channels. We want people to know it's you when they see your communications. But next, we want responsive and secure agency websites. We need to address ADA accessibility with branded design and some intuitive navigation. This website is going to be your hub for communications with your residents and community as a whole. And finally, we got to think about social media. As we become more reliant on the internet, social media becomes more and more important for your agency. So, okay, kicking it off, does your agency have a brand? When you see those logos down at the bottom of the screen, I guarantee you, one, know who that brand is, and two, you probably feel a certain way about that brand just when you see their logo. We need to figure out what your brand identity for your agency is going to be, because whether you recognize it or not, your agency has a brand, and we need to make sure we're nurturing that and that your brand has a positive perception within your community. Elements of your brand include your logo, the colors you use, the design that you use on your website, your type styles or your fonts, and finally, the icon that you use in your logo. So, okay, why is it important? We're kind of starting to understand what a brand is. Why do you need it? Well, first things first, it promotes agency recognition. I don't know about you guys, but at my housing authority, we were always getting confused as part of the city or a different organization before we really established our strong branding. It helps people recognize you and what you do. Next, it's going to help set you apart. A lot of housing agencies may have some private sector housing they compete against in your market. Well, we need to set you apart and show how you're different. Next, it can provide motivation and direction, not just for your staff, but for your board and your residents as well. Refreshed branding is encouraging not just to you and your staff, but it can be encouraging to the community as a whole. And also, it helps your residents recognize your communications. So you don't get a bunch of calls to your office asking, is this letter from you? Or did you guys post this on social media? When they see your branding, they know they can trust that information. So, okay, I got you on board. You need to do branding. Where do you even start? What are the components? Well, first things first is our name. And I know that seems simple, but it's so important, especially in housing. I always like to kind of tell people, what words do you even use to describe your agency? Do you call yourself the such and such housing authority, or do you prefer affordable housing? there's a big discussion right now on if affordable housing providers should call themselves housing authorities or, your city's housing. There's a really negative connotation with the word authority sometimes. It has nothing to do with your organization or your perception in the community. People just may have a negative opinion of that word. So many, housing providers are choosing to just drop that completely from their branding, and that's okay. And finally, I always ask them, okay, what do your residents know you as? I don't think there's any point in fighting an uphill battle with your residents. If they know you as a certain name, let's go for it. Let's embrace it. We don't want to confuse anybody by changing something so completely you're unrecognizable. Next, we need to think about fonts. I know that seems silly. Of course, they need to be legible, but they can also be really expressive, and they can really say something about your agency. Next, think of your colors. My favorite thing to talk to housers about are what colors we're going to use to describe their agency. I always mention, let's pick something that's significant to you guys or your community. A lot of times we pick like a local high school's colors or university's colors because they're significant, not just to the staff, but to the residents as well. Also, what feelings do those colors portray? It's a nice way to kind of invoke feeling in your logo. And finally, I think the most fun part are your icons. I like to use them as a visual representation of your mission and your vision as an agency. They are your way to tell someone in pictures what you do and what's important to you. And just because I know it's easier when we can see something, let's look at some examples. All right, these are two examples of housing authorities that we helped rebrand as an agency. The first is Dothan Housing Authority in Alabama. The first thing is we changed the name, the words. They're Dothan Housing now. Now, I know it probably caught your eye because it catches mine too. There's a peanut in the middle of that logo. Well, that's extremely important to their community. They are the peanut capital of the world. So we knew though it'd be a challenge, we had to incorporate it in there. Next, we use some beautiful icons like the peanut to tell a story. So as you see that little plant icon, that is to represent the new growth they hope to spawn in their residents. And if you see, it's actually a peanut plant we decided to use to represent that, to kind of tie it back into the community. Next, you'll see that beautiful golden arrow that's reaching up into a little house because they want to take this new opportunity to lead their residents to hopefully home ownership. That beautiful gold color we used is significant to their community because it's one of their high school's colors, but it's also the color of a peanut blossom, bringing it all back into their community. And finally, one of my favorite little parts of their icon is their little person in the middle in the shape of a Y. Well, we chose that because their slogan is, "You are our why." So we wanted to make that little connection with their resident and their logo. All of that works together to tell this huge story that's empowering for them as an agency and their staff to kind of say what they're about just using a picture. You can see their beautiful font that's it's professional, but it's still fun and it has some movement in it. And I think it's a great way of showing how you can use your logo and your branding to really tell a story. Next, we have Auburn Housing Authority, which being an Auburn grad, I have to show off whenever I can. My favorite thing about their logo is if you're an Auburn fan like me, you recognize those colors immediately because it's Auburn University, orange and blue. They manage two other housing authorities. And as you see, we used secondary colors from the university to brand those as well. We carried the key over from their before design because of their new slogan of "Your key to affordable housing opportunities." And as you see in the base of the key, the little roof line, because they're the key to housing opportunities. And finally, the ridges in the key, there are 3 of them because there's 3 housing authorities that they manage. So these are little things, but I think they're powerful examples to show you how refreshing your branding, revisiting it, or just starting branding from the beginning is really valuable and empowering to your agency. So, okay, we've got that powerful brand, we're ready to use it. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, we got to make people aware. And if you've ever talked to anyone in public relations or marketing, I guarantee they've said these 3 C's to you before. Creativity, consistency, and continuity. We've got to be creative. If you look at both of those logos we just looked at, they're pretty creative, and there's a lot of work that went into making them as powerful as they are. We've got to be consistent. We got to use it in all of our communications. If you don't use it in one press release, people are going to get confused. Just keep using it, and we need to be continually using it throughout all channels of branding as they move forward as agencies. This helps you build recognition and trust with your stakeholders. So all three of those C's come together to build what we call integrated marketing. And basically that's a fancy term for saying we are using your branding everywhere and it's all working together. So I made a little list of places I recommend housers use their logo and their branding. This does not have to happen overnight. You can gradually move into all of these, but I think it's important that it's on your radar because you want everything to look united and work together to build that recognition amongst your community. And if you see it at the bottom of this list, I think it's the most important place to have your branding, your website. So your agency website, why do I think it's so important? Well, having worked in housing, I think it needs to be the hub for your official information as an agency. First thing, your website is a form of owned media. That's important because it means you control it. You control what information goes on there, how it's worded, and when that information gets released to the public. That's important for your residents. It should be a reliable and secure source of information. Residents should know when they go to your website, they can rely on it to have up-to-date and important information, and that it's secure for them to access. Your website should be responsive. This means that it should be available for residents to view and access no matter what device they have available to them. Many people don't realize public housing residents access the internet 80% of the time using a smartphone. So if your website does not pull up correctly on a smartphone, or if it's hard to read and navigate, your residents just aren't going to use it because they can't use it with the technology they have available. So it's extremely important that we make sure your website is a responsive design. So how can I secure my site? Luckily, I have a pretty easy answer that tends to help us out. The easiest way is a secure certificate. If you see the pictures over on the side of the slide, I guarantee you've seen all three of these, even if you didn't notice. That first one up at the top, that little closed lock, that means that site has a secure certificate. And basically what the secure certificate does is it kind of locks down your site and makes it a little more secure. Under that, you'll see that the connection is not secure. That means they don't have a secure certificate. You've probably seen that in that little box pop up from time to time. And I don't know about y'all, but it always makes me a little nervous. And finally, I know you have seen that not secure. Google now actually will pop up a whole page that's like, warning, warning, the site's not secure. And I know I never go through to those sites just because I'm nervous about maybe, catching a virus or something crazy. Your residents feel that way too. If those two messages pop up and it kind of, makes you nervous as just a person surfing the internet, why would your resident feel any different if it's that way on the housing authority site? So it's vital that we make sure that you have that secure certificate so those messages aren't popping up and freaking anybody out. That responsive design. Here's a great example of a website with good responsive design. If you've built a website in the past 5 years, you've probably heard of like desktop view and smartphone view. Basically, this is the next step. It just means no matter what screen we're looking at, the site's going to respond and make it look perfect. So as you see on all 4 of those views, you're getting information you need. This is also nice, and you've probably run into this if you've ever been to a website on your phone and you've had to do that like pinch thing or like expand to make it bigger, and it's just been a pain in the neck to try to get around the site. The site probably wasn't responsive. And I don't know about y'all, but I don't tend to stay on those sites very long when something's not responding and I can't use it the way I need to. The residents will feel the same way. So make sure you're getting that responsive design so everyone can use the site as you intended. Next, we've got to think about ADA accessibility. I know in housing, we think about ADA accessibility when it comes to our physical units. We've got to think about it with our website as well. There have been many lawsuits recently about things not being accessible, and it's important you think about it before the site's already live. Essentially, when we're talking about ADA accessibility, we're thinking about users who may have to use a computer in a different way than you. For example, if someone's blind or has a visual impairment, they won't be able to see the site like you do. They won't be able to navigate with a mouse. So we have to make sure things are accessible to them and the technologies they need. How do we know if the site's accessible? Well, we do something called an ADA scan. It basically goes through your website page by page and scans for things that may be accessibility issues. It comes up with a nice report and it gives you a list of things that might be issues. Of course, there's no replacement for going through your site manually, but online there are plenty of great resources. We actually have a whole nother presentation about how to make a site accessible because it's a very in-depth technology, and it's often easiest if you work with a developer who really understands it, so it's something you guys don't have to worry about as much. So, okay, we think we need a website now. We know we've got this all-star branding. Where do we start? Well, I don't know about you guys, but I always like to start right from the beginning, and you got to choose the right web provider. So first things first, do they actually understand the affordable housing industry? I don't know about you guys, but when I was at my housing authority, the most frustrating thing was when I was working with someone who maybe didn't understand the unique challenges we have as housers. It's very different than most people might think, and you run into situations that if you haven't worked in housing, you would have never guessed existed. So that's the first question I always like to ask. What is their experience with that responsive design and addressing web accessibility? That's important because you guys don't need to worry about that. You need to work with someone who can make those things happen for you. So what experience are they actually bringing to the table in the affordable housing industry? And what do their references say? If they've worked with another housing authority, how do they feel about that web provider? That's important, and you've got to start off on the right foot to make sure this is a fun, easy process for you guys. And second, the best way we can make this website work for you and eliminate problems is by choosing features that are really going to help you connect with your residents and your community by eliminating maybe some duplicated effort within your agency. It's a lot easier to communicate with your residents when you've got one really great channel that's working for your agency. So let's talk about some of those features I always like to see in housers' websites. The first thing is a special alerts module. These come in a few different ways. Sometimes they pop up right when you get onto a website. Here you can see on this one, it's up at the top actually. And when you click on it, it brings up that extra box with some more information. In the time of coronavirus and COVID-19, since everything's always changing and as housers, we're always updating what our policies and information are, it's a great way to get that information right in front of your residents first thing. Next is a notifications module. This is similar to the special alerts, but basically whenever you would update a page on your website, you could send it out to your residents through a text or through an email. That kind of eliminates the need to get people to come to your website first. You're actually meeting them and giving them that heads up that, hey, something's changed or there's something new we want to tell you about. It's a great way to interact directly with your residents and get their attention and get them back to your website to get some more info. Next, think about maybe doing something like a news module. No one knows all the fabulous things y'all are doing as an agency unless you're telling them. And a news module is a great way to take advantage and start that conversation. This one has a great module on their homepage, and then it creates a running history of all of the good PR for that agency. That is just a small screenshot that I was able to get from that agency's website. And there's so much more. So it shows as an agency what they're doing right now for their residents and community, but also what they've done over a series of years for that community and agency. And it really helps show that you've been an active player in your community for a while and that you're sticking around. Next is a calendar module. Y'all, if your residents don't know you're having events, they're not going to show up. So you've got to get those events in front of them. Especially now when a lot of our events are online or through Zoom, it's important that our residents are reached and they know what's coming up. So a calendar is a great way to do that and get them involved. I personally really like when calendars allow you to add it to your, Outlook calendar or your Google calendar or your Apple calendar. That's a great way for residents to be able to see an event they may want to participate in, save it, and be ready whenever that event's coming up. Next, I know my HR departments are excited about this one, but think about maybe taking online employment applications. That's a great way, especially when people can't come into your office and pick up paper applications, that on their own time, they can apply to a position, get you all the information you need online, and then you're not worried about having a zillion paper copies of everything. You have it all digitally, and they can attach like resumes or references or whatever you need from them all digitally, so you have it in one place to access. It's a great way to kind of eliminate having paper copies everywhere, I think. And along that same vein, think about other forms you could probably take online, maybe using like a custom form builder tool. This agency did a really great job of having some awesome forms online, but I've seen agencies do all sorts of things like taking income changes or residence changes, things like that online, so that the burden to come into the office just isn't there. It not only makes it easier for your resident to get this information back to you, but it also makes y'all's job a little easier of organizing that information when it's all coming in digitally to one place for you. Another thing that helps maybe eliminate some duplicated efforts would be like a board module. I know lots of agencies have had to move their board commissioner meetings online to Zoom or things like that to accommodate physical distancing. So a board module kind of eliminates that need for those giant binders I know a lot of you guys have that you lay out for your commissioners before each meeting. This is just kind of like a digital binder if you think about it, where you can upload information and have it available to them 24/7. I always advise that they have a login, so that way that information is only accessible to people who need it, and you can change those logins as you need. But it's a great way to eliminate those giant paper copies. You can tell everyone, hey, here you go, you log in, everything's there as you expect it, and commissioners can then review it as they need to, as their schedule allows, and they can come into that board meeting with you ready to rock and roll. And a last feature I always think can really help you get in touch with your residents and further your goals is social media integration. Basically, this allows you to update something on your website and from there post it onto social media as well. It eliminates the need of duplication of efforts. So you don't post something on your website and then have to run over and make the exact same post on Facebook. It's just a simple click of a button and it sends it on out for you. And I think this is a really great segue into talking about how you're actually going to make social media work for your agency. Because I know it's a really popular topic, but it's kind of difficult to wrap your head around and do successfully. So let's think about it some more. How are we actually going to effectively use this to connect with your residents? Well, first things first, let's choose the best social media platform for you as an agency. And the way I always like to think about that is, who are you actually trying to reach? Your residents as a whole? Do you want to reach a specific group of your residents? What is your goal? Who are you actually trying to reach here? Next, okay, we've thought about who we want to reach. Are we actually sharing content for them? Is the information you want to share on social media actually something they would like to see or need to know? We need to be thinking about these things because we don't want to share content just to share content. People won't interact with it. And finally, we've got to realize we can direct followers back to our own or controlled media, AKA your website. Social media is a fabulous tool, but it's a tool. It's not the be all end all of your communication with your residents. It's something that, though it is a great and powerful tool, it can also be kind of difficult at times. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this. I know I have. When you're on Facebook and you get a request from someone you could have sworn you were already friends with. And of course, you accept that friend request, and then you start getting some spammy messages. The same thing can happen with pages. Social media is a great tool and you can get information out very quickly, but there is nothing more valuable to you as an agency than your own media and your website. You control that. No one's making a fake housing authority website, but there have been Facebooks that popped up that were less than legitimate and could get some confusion with your residents. So remember, it's a tool, it's not the be all end all of communication. So, all right, I mentioned we have to choose the best platform. How do we do that? Well, today I'm running through just 4 social medias. There's many, many more. There's new social medias every day. These are 4 I think would be best suited for housing agencies. Now, the first one that I think probably is best for most people is Facebook. Facebook reaches a really broad group of people, broad ages, areas. It's kind of, the catch-all platform, how we like to think of it. Facebook is also really great for housers because it gives you the ability to create and share a wide variety of posts. You don't have to just do pictures. It's not just videos. You can easily link to your website or to other websites. It's very user-friendly in that way. And they don't really, push down posts of a certain type. So I think it's a great way to get whatever you need to know out there to your residents and your community as a whole. And it's really easy for them to share whatever you've put out there. The other one I see a lot of housers using is Instagram, which is another pretty good tool. The biggest issue I have with Instagram for housers is to be successful, you have to have really strong photos or strong videos. That's the only really things you can share on Instagram. It reaches a smaller audience. Women are the most active on Instagram. And it skews a little younger. So you tend to get interaction from younger people on Instagram. It can still be a very valuable tool. For example, if you have just a resident service event and you have just fabulous pictures and you have permission to use those pictures online, Instagram can be great for that. It's fun to look at those photos and kind of see what was happening. And they can tell a really great story for your agency. But if you don't take photos very often, Instagram's probably not the best fit for you. LinkedIn. This is the social media platform that I see people have the most trouble with. LinkedIn is really focused on professional to professional interaction. If you're trying to get your residents to come out to an event, LinkedIn's not the place. It's not really designed to work that way, but LinkedIn can be super powerful if you're trying to post about an employment opportunity or you want to share information with other housing professionals. It's great for business to business, but it's not really for communication with your community or your residents. And finally, Twitter. Twitter is a platform that I love personally, but I don't think it makes the most sense for most housing agencies. It's popular with most young users, but it's specifically short form content. They have a very small character limit and they have a limit on their videos as well of how long they can be. So you have to be really powerful in your messaging and you have to be really intentional with the words you say. Most people who are very successful and most agencies who are successful using Twitter tweet multiple times a day. It's a pretty time intensive platform. But if you're up to the challenge and you want to retweet a few times a day and get on there and you feel comfortable with it and your residents seem to engage with it, then hey, go for it. Twitter could be a good platform for you. But like I said at the beginning, Facebook's what I always bring it back to. I think if you're just starting out as an agency, Facebook is the best bang for your buck. My advice always is to do one platform really well instead of doing 4 not so well. Really focus your efforts. And then once you're comfortable and you've got a groove going with one platform, maybe go ahead and add a second if you feel like your agency's up to it. So some quick do's and don'ts on how we're going to be connecting with your community and your residents through these social medias. Well, the first thing is, yes, we are going to share content frequently and intentionally. Have a goal in mind. When you are creating these social medias for your agency, plan a schedule of when you think you're going to post. The goal I set for most agencies when we're starting out, post once a week. Try that and see how it goes. We can always get more frequently if you guys are up to the challenge, but let's try it at least once a week. What we don't want to do is share really infrequently. We don't want to like share once every 6 months because residents aren't going to just check back every week if you only post once every month. So we want to make sure that we're posting consistently and that the information we're posting is actually relevant to the people we're reaching. So don't just post silly things so you have something to post that week. Really strategically sit down and think of something your residents need or want to know from you and something they'll want to engage with. That's how you're going to be successful on social media. Yet next, we do want to use social media to direct back to our website. Use that tool, get them back to your own media. Let them know something's updated on your site or link to a new press release you just put out. Use that tool. But again, we're not going to use it as a standalone means of communication. That can get tricky and hard. It's best if we just use it as the tool that it is. Next, we do want to use it to alert. Social media is fabulous to get information quickly to your residents. It allows people to share it amongst their own social circles and really get that information going quickly. But we don't want to use it as our only source of notification. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes my friends will post something really time sensitive and I don't see it till hours later when it doesn't matter as much. So it's important that yes, though Facebook and other social medias can be a great tool to get information out there quickly, there's no guarantees on how fast we can actually get it to people that need to see it. And the final do is we need to respond to messages quickly and decisively, and that includes comments as well. We don't want to ignore those. And I know that's a challenge sometimes for agencies. The worst thing that we always see sometimes is that someone leaves a not so nice comment for you. Well, we need to address that. You need to comment and let them know that you've heard that concern, or you need to try to remediate that situation. I know it's never fun to get negative, constructive criticism, but use that for what it is. If a resident feels comfortable enough to leave you something negative, take that as the positive, use it as a moment to grow, and be respectful. Something I actually noticed with my agency is that if we got a negative comment or a negative message, if we actually handled that situation and we make sure that person felt heard, and that maybe sparked a good change in our organization, or it brought something to light we weren't aware of, those people are more likely to come back and positively interact with your content. It's kind of a neat phenomenon I found personally is that, people who are really active feel more comfortable making those kinds of posts. And if you, make them feel heard and address that issue, they're more likely to come back and give you props later on. And again, my bottom line, choose whatever platform you want to use wisely and commit to it. We can always add more platforms later. We don't have to worry about doing every single platform right from the beginning. So choose one and do it well. All right, some good examples I have. Well, Greenville Housing Authority has done some fabulous stuff with social media that I think lots of other housers could do something similar. One of the first things they did is they used it to actually promote their wait list. Whenever we're doing kind of posts like this, we need to make sure that we're following fair housing guidelines. Typically, you don't like to target these posts, but it's great to get it out on social media, especially Facebook, because like I said, a huge group of people uses Facebook, and that can be super beneficial to get that information to people who may not have seen it otherwise. The same thing with their, they did a program to reach landlords for their VASH program. This got it to a huge group of people that may not have seen this information otherwise. So remember, social media can be a fabulous tool for your agency. We just have to think about how we're using it and really use it to our advantage. And as you'll see on both of these posts, it links back to their owned media, their website, so they could control what the actual information these people were seeing in real time. And it put them on their website with their phone number, their contact information, so there was never any confusion. And all right, finally, to wrap us up here, we've talked a lot about digital media and new media. But what about our traditional media? Because they're still pretty important in the 21st century. So thinking about things like your local newspaper, your local news channel, how do we get interactive with them to reach your residents? Well, tried and true press releases. I know it seems old-fashioned, they're important. is a great way to promote local interest to your community and your city as a whole. It gives great name recognition, and if you're writing it, you're helping get that story out there from the angle you want it to be seen from. Also, if you're trying to reach other housers in your area or just spread ideas throughout, the region, think about maybe your regional publications. FADA has a fabulous publication. Circnaro, I know, has the Circulator, which is fabulous to reach other housers and share some good resident ideas. So really think about, how can we get that story out there, not just to our community, but to other housers, because maybe they'll want to use it as well. So when do we need to write a press release? I'm giving you 4 good examples. When you're hiring a new staff member, a new board of commissioner or a chairperson, those are both really exciting events that probably affect your community. So let's let them know. Let's let the whole community know this awesome news. Next, for a grant award announcement. This is fabulous for your community and your agency. So take that time to explain what that grant actually means for your residents and your community. And finally, same thing with a housing program or resident service program. Get that information out there and explain why it's important. Housing can be confusing to people who don't have experience in the industry. So take the opportunity to explain and let them in on the good news. I'm happy to provide templates on any of these. I know it can be hard to start from scratch, so I've got templates, and if you need them, please reach out. Try to make it easy on you, where you can just replace your name and kind of add information as you need. The last little tip I have about these are post them on your website first. Sometimes a newspaper may not have room to fit it in that paper that week, but they may be able to share it on their social media, which can probably reach more people than you can alone as an agency. So make sure to think about that when you're making these press releases. And I know that seems fast, but that was kind of a whirlwind. And of course, if you have questions, I'm here to answer them. I love public relations and marketing for housing authorities. I think it's important that we kind of change the narrative and share your stories as an agency, not just to your residents, but to your community as a whole. Because once people understand how important your agency is, they're more likely to partner with you and work with you to reach more people. So, all right, I will turn it back over to Blake for any Q&As we have.
Well, thank you very much, Katie. That was a fascinating presentation. So we are now opening it up to questions and answers, and we invite participants to submit theirs using the Q&A link on the bottom of your screen there. So please, submit those now. And we do have about another 15 minutes or so that we can be taking questions. Our first is, how often should a housing authority examine their marketing plans, their logos, etc.?
That's a great question. It really depends on your agency. I think a fabulous rule of thumb is annually, when you're doing those annual reports, think about how that is servicing your agency and make sure you are communicating at the level you need to be. When thinking about your branding specifically, we don't like to even consider really changing things every 5 years. You want to kind of give that new brand some time to get into your community and make sure it's being received before we say, oh, that's not working. Because, it takes time for people to recognize you and the way you're going to be presenting in your community. So I say annually, look at your PR and how you're doing. And then every 5 years, maybe look at your branding as a whole and see how it's servicing you as an agency and if it's still lining up with your vision and your mission.
Our next question is, do you think messaging should vary from one social media outlet to another?
Okay, that's a great question. I think overall, you should have unified messaging. That being said, you're going to reach different people based on different platforms. So I would say take a real critical look at who you're reaching on each platform. For example, on Twitter, it's probably not going to be very successful for you to market that for a seniors event. So when we're thinking about where we want to market certain events or where we want to, push our best efforts, really sit down and say, who are we reaching? I think you should change your messaging based on who you're going to reach, but we never want to have just completely differing opinions, of course. We want to make sure everything does still work together, but if one platform is better for pushing a certain kind of event or a certain kind of service that you're offering to a group, then focus more on that platform. Ultimately, do what makes the most sense for you and your agency.
Our next question is, where would you tell someone to go for a critique of their website for ideas?
I always say my inbox is open. Having worked in housing, I think Housers, it's a great community of people who want to lift others up. Ask your friends, ask what they think and how your branding is holding up. I also think your staff and your board are an excellent sounding board for, hey, is this holding up to what we want to be in the community? Is this putting forth, the foot we want to in our community? Asking them can kind of be a safe way to get unbiased opinion. But I think most importantly, talk to your residents. Most housing authorities are doing surveys with their resident anyway. Maybe tack on a question in your next survey and say, hey, how is our marketing? How's our PR? How's our branding? How do you feel about it? And people will tell you if they ask.
We have another question here. So what are some tips for smaller agencies that may not have expertise or the funding available to hire staff for many of these efforts?
Of course. Okay, smaller agencies. My agency was not huge by any means. It all depends on how much time you can dedicate to it. No agency is too small for a good website. Different providers will work with anybody of any size. I think it's pretty vital to have that information all in one place. And like I always say, social media is free. It doesn't take very much time to post to Facebook once a week. Doesn't take too much time to set up a Facebook. Talk to your residents and see how they want to interact with you and focus on going in that direction. If you talk to your residents and they say, we want a website, then go try to figure out something that's going to work with your agency's size and budget. I guarantee there's something out there. Or if your residents say, we want a Facebook to start out, then start out with that. Just really being intentional about where you're putting your time and your effort is very helpful, especially to a small agency, because in housing, I know you're often short of time. So communicate with your residents, see how they want to interact with you, and try to narrow into that. And then if you have more time later down the line, maybe we add something else. But starting small is totally an option. Facebook is free, and it's a great way to kind of test the waters on getting people to interact with you online.
We have time for a couple of more questions. If anyone would like to post those in the Q&A. I'll ask this, when it comes to social media, how important is it to develop a policy ahead of time for what are appropriate posts and, giving the reins to your staff or having some gatekeeper before you post?
It is vital. Having an idea of what your standards of conduct are going to be before you start is vital. It's going to set you up for success. Think about things in your agency. Think about questions you may get or comments you may get or phone calls you get and how you respond to them as an agency. Because I guarantee you're going to get those on social media as well. Have some things ready. You know how you respond to something over the phone. Well, maybe make a little script out. Take that script, and when someone comments it online, be ready. I always encourage agencies, when you're doing social media, you need to have a point person, whether that be a designated staff or your executive director, someone that you feel comfortable speaking on behalf of the agency in those situations. And having some things ready to go kind of helps you respond quicker. But of course, my advice is always run something by a couple of people in your agency before you get too eager to post, especially if you're responding to a comment or something of that nature. I know it's easy to respond, the knee-jerk reaction, but have something ready. It can be as simple as, thank you so much for your comment. We're going to reach out to you privately. And that can get you a long way and buy you a little time to think of how you really want to respond and handle that situation in the best way for your agency.
That's great advice. Our next question is, do you have suggestions on how to grow your following on social outlets? Our followers have been growing slowly but steadily. Is there something that helps jumpstart that growth?
Yeah, I always, so I say is good. There's nothing wrong with taking a while. Social media, you're not going to blow up overnight. But if you want more engagement, work with that algorithm. Post a little more frequently. Look at your posts that you've made maybe over the past couple of months. See which ones have done particularly well. If you're using Facebook or any real social media, they'll give you some analytics. Just take a little look at them. You don't have to be an expert by any means. Take a look and see what's working really well and what people are interacting with and sharing or liking or commenting on, and post more of the same. Give them what they want. And that's an easy way to get people to interact with you a little more. And when people are more interactive with you, Facebook specifically helps push you out to some more people. So it's kind of a mutually beneficial thing for your page. The people who already follow you are interacting more, and people who maybe haven't seen you yet will start seeing your post a little bit more.
This next question is, do you have thoughts about how housing authorities can use ads on social media?
Yes, I do. I know it can be a little tricky because we have to keep in mind fair housing. And especially on Facebook, you can dial down and be extraordinarily specific with whom you want to see those ads. I recommend, if you're going to do a lot of paid advertising on Facebook, work with an agency who has done projects similar in the past. They're going to understand those fair housing requirements and make sure you're staying above the board in that aspect, because we do want to get those ads to the right people, but we want to make sure we're not excluding in that process. But I think it can be a fabulous tool, specifically when you're trying to recruit like a specific group, like landlords, or even like BASH to that extent, getting that information to the right people in a way that does not exclude anyone. So it's a little tactful. I would recommend probably working with an agency at that point. There are tons of agencies who specialize in housing. I know we do, and we do marketing campaigns on Facebook for housers. And I think it kind of helps add a little bit of protection there, because you're bouncing ideas off people who have done this before and are going to make sure you're meeting those guidelines.
Okay, we have time for a few more questions. Again, please use the Q&A box to post them. So we'll wrap up in just a few minutes here or so. You'd mentioned having, running some ideas or getting the pulse of the residents for when you're doing some branding. Have you have any examples of unveiling a new logo that missed the mark? Or how do you make sure that it doesn't?
I think that can happen. I think sometimes as agencies, we're really involved with what you're doing internally. I think it's important that before you start that journey, cue your residents in. If you have a resident advisory board, I think they are fabulous, fabulous voices to bring to the table when you start thinking about marketing. But even broader, I think it's nice to kind of float this idea a little more broadly if you can. Of course, the best way to avoid that is to just avoid it completely. sometimes, yeah, you can maybe miss the mark and you need to revisit a little quicker. But typically when you're working with a professional agency, we're going to help you ensure that doesn't happen. You know, we're going to make sure that everything is going to come across as you intend, because branding and PR can be really difficult. We kind of live in a time where you have to choose your words specifically and carefully, and you know, working with someone can really help you make sure you're going to come off as it's intended. That's why when I talk about what words to use to describe your agency, you know, don't make it hard on yourself. If your residents know you as the housing authority, then maybe we need to leave authority in your name. You know, really involving people from day one helps you eliminate those mistakes. Making sure you have a plethora of voices coming in and giving even just a little feedback is good. And I think RABs are excellent at helping you kind of get that pulse of the community.
Another question coming here. Can you discuss a little more about the ADA requirements as they relate to websites?
Of course, I can't get too in depth, but there's a lot. The biggest one I've seen that people don't immediately think of are like PDFs and Word documents. They can cause a lot of trouble for ADA accessibility, and those need to be what we call remediated. Essentially, most ADA issues we're thinking of happen when a blind user is having to use a software that reads the website to them. So first off, the website has to be navigable by keyboard. You'd be shocked at how many websites are not set up to do that. Next, we need to make sure that anything that links is linking to something that is correct and real. And we also want to make sure that the language we're using on our website is clear and consistent throughout. We want to make sure that it's not confusing. In housing specifically, we love to use acronyms that maybe people don't know what we mean all the time. So we like to avoid using those when possible, or when we haven't explained what they mean. Another easy concept to think about with ADA accessibility are things like colors. We want to make sure you can actually read things on your site. I don't know how often you guys have run into it, but maybe they have like teeny tiny text and you can't read it, and you know you have perfect vision. Little things like that up into big things like how your site is coded. It's an extremely wide issue. There's a lot of requirements that go into it. The best advice I have is to really delve into that research yourself, or work with a web provider who really understands ADA. To give you an example, our firm, all of our sites we make are ADA accessible for housers. And we actually even have a blind member of staff who reviews all of our sites for us, just because we want to make sure that she can see everything she needs to and get around the site if she needs to. It's that complex. So those are a few examples of things, but of course there are many more, and they evolve every day because we're always getting new technologies and better ways to get that information to people who may be using an adaptive technology.
Piggybacking on that, in terms of how fast technology changes all the time, how do you make sure that you don't, that you aren't doing certain requirements that that when it comes, a year later, the technologies change, you have a very hard time evolving and adapting?
Who truly understands with those. A lot of times, especially for our clients, we make changes you guys don't even have to worry about, because we try to keep on top of that for you. The best thing is that if you go online to ada.gov, they release any kind of updates or new information we have, they will release it there. And those are the standards we use to create accessible websites. And sometimes we get some fabulous breakthroughs and something gets a lot easier. And sometimes it's a little harder on our end to make those accommodations, but they're important to make sure everyone can access your site. So try to stay in the loop, stay in the know, but importantly, use a web provider who is going to help you with that burden and stay in the know for you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Katie. This has been very informative. We appreciate your presenting to us today. So this does conclude our session now, and we would like to thank all of you for attending this afternoon. And just a quick reminder that this session has been recorded, and we will be posting the recording on the Whova web and mobile app soon. We'd also like to invite all of you to take the session survey in Whova following this event. And finally, we look forward to seeing you at tomorrow's session. We will begin at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. In the meantime, have a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.